Good, good. Hi, Hector.
Hi, Nick.
All right, so we are live. And I've got a minute too. Antoinette, with your permission, I will start the webinar and we'll see attendees start to join us.
Okay. Should we give folks another minute before we get started with roll call?
Yeah, in fact, I don't even have 6 p.m. yet, so why don't you give it a couple of minutes?
Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Hector. Hi,
Hey,
Joan.
good. Good, good.
Hi, Joan.
Hi, Beverly. Something's not right with my computer tonight. What can I say?
Why should you be different than anybody else? Hey, Pat.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Pat. How are you?
I'm alive. How are you guys doing? Hello, Joan.
Hello, Pat.
Oh my God, what's the matter, Joan?
I think Joan was having some computer issues.
Ah,
Here we go. Okay, all's good.
Yeah.
Antoinette, question. Did you get Cindy's email?
No, let me check it now.
Hector, if you hear me, how are you doing with your audio?
I'm good. Today I'm good.
Oh, we can
Glad
hear
to be
you.
here.
Great.
Yeah. I don't have an email from Cindy. It might be that my phone didn't refresh. But if you could forward it to me.
Cindy van der Bosch. Yeah. You get it? Oh,
Did she
okay.
send it recently, or is this a older email?
All right. The committee would like a joint committee between the housing and the access and ability.
Yeah, she had emailed, we have that as an item on the agenda, and she had emailed me about that previously,
Oh,
but I
okay.
don't have an email from her this afternoon. Oh,
Okay,
are you
great.
talking about that or another email?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Jeremy, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Happy to. Folks, I am going to mute everybody. I'm going to call committee members. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, acknowledge I've called your name, and then mute yourself again. If you're a board member but not a committee member, I'm not going to call your name, but I see your name in the participant list and I will write it down. So what do I do with my pen? Fortunately, I have a backup. Okay. Antoinette Martinez. You're muted, Antoinette.
Present.
Thank you. Genesis Aquino. Genesis? You're muted if you're here. I see your name. We'll get back to you. Nick Azadian.
Present.
Thank you. Joan Body.
Here.
Thank you. Gladys Bruno. Jalixa Campesano. John Fontelis. Hector Gonzalez.
Here.
Thank you. John Johnston. John?
I'm here.
Thank
Hello?
you. Yep, I heard you this time. I saw you unmute. I didn't hear you before. Marilyn Melman. Rovika Rajkishan.
Here.
Thank you. Maria Roca. John Santori. Elise Shuck. Genesis Aquino.
Here.
Thank you. That's the list. Antoinette?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Okay, welcome everyone. I know we haven't met in a while. Our last meeting, I believe, was in June. But we are hoping to meet moving forward monthly. That way we can start thinking about some committee projects that we can be involved in. So this meeting today is really an opportunity for us to touch base with one another and for us to really set goals on what our expectations are from this committee, and how we can work together to tackle different ideas that were put forth at our last meeting in June. So, I really want to thank everyone for making the time tonight. I had sent out a poll maybe a week and a half ago. So thank you so much for taking the time to respond to that. We tried to accommodate as many people as possible. And this was the time that kind of won the spot. But at the end of this meeting, we'll set some time to see what would work for folks moving forward for the meeting in December and so forth. So I put together this agenda, but if there are any items that you feel should be discussed, please let me know and we can add them on. I wanted to give an update on the Fifth Avenue Committee projects that are currently pending, and then also address the supportive housing initiative that was brought up at the last community board meeting. There was some back and forth over a proposal that Eric Adams had made. So wanted to talk about that a little bit more. And then also to get into the nitty gritty of the expectations of the housing committee and different working groups that we can be a part of. And then talking about our meeting schedule, how frequently we'd like to meet moving forward, and if monthly is something that we would like to do, if that meets our expectations. And then lastly, talking about communication, what's the best way for us to keep in contact with one another and for us to have a solid way of consolidating different documents and having that handy for one another. Is there anything that anyone would like to add? All right, I'll take your silence as this is good. Also, the chat is open, so feel free to utilize that. Okay, so So just a quick update. We have been in communication with Michelle De La Uz, who's the executive director of the Fifth Avenue Committee, which the abbreviation for that is FACT. And right now, the application is still on hold. The Fifth Avenue Committee, they're waiting for state and city approval for the application. And I've emailed them several times. Michelle responded that she will be in contact with the community board once the application is live. So we are at a standstill for that. And then also, I'm not sure if anyone has been able to pass by 62nd Street and 4th Avenue. Okay. If you had, you would see that the senior housing project that the Fifth Avenue Committee is a part of is already getting taller and taller by the day. There's a lot of progress being made to that building. So just wanted to give a heads up on that. Okay. So at our last community board meeting, it was mentioned that Eric Adams had held a press conference in Sunset Park. And I believe that there was just maybe just some miscommunication and interpretation on a New York Times article that was released. There was a lot of photo ops of Eric Adams in front of a vacant hotel here in Sunset Park. And a lot of folks believe that what would transpire from that were more homeless shelters in the community. But what that looks like is and I really appreciate Genesis, and we actually have Amy on the line with us.
So, Antoinette, I'm sorry, before you continue, Amy's on as an attendee. Can we switch her as a panelist?
Oh, I see Amy. Yep.
I just took care of it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So Genesis did some groundwork and actually helped to invite Amy on the call today, who's going just to help give some more context on this legislation. So what it looks like is that it is not a homeless shelter that's being proposed. It's Eric Adams moving forward with legislation that was recently passed this year that was really advocated by housing activists, and it's called the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act, and that's HONDA. So Amy, really appreciate you being on the line today and joining us. Would you be able to just share a little bit more about HONDA and supportive housing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Amy Bloomsack. I work at Neighbors Together. We are an organization located in Brooklyn. We've been there for almost 40 years, and we work with low income and homeless New Yorkers. And so the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act is exactly what Antoinette just said. It is a piece of legislation that passed in last year's budget. And it is legislation that would essentially allow for the conversion of distressed hotels or commercial office buildings to be converted into affordable housing for very low income New Yorkers. So as many of you know, the pandemic was really hard for a lot of people, including businesses, including hotels. The tourism industry really took a hit. And there were all of these distressed and unused hotels around. And so what HONDA does, we call it HONDA for short, what HONDA does is it allows for the conversion of those hotels into affordable housing. And I heard earlier, it was mentioned that there was a concern that this would allow for the siting of more shelters in the neighborhood. And I totally understand that concern. I think it's a common concern across New York City. And I just want to be really clear that any building that would be converted through HONDA would not be a homeless shelter. It would be permanent affordable housing, or supportive housing, which is a type of affordable housing with services added in. So I'll just share a little bit about supportive housing, and then I think I want to stop to see if there's any questions, if we can do that. Does that make sense, Antoinette?
Yep, that'll be perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So supportive housing is a really successful model of affordable housing. Supportive housing, there are various types of supportive housing, but it is permanent affordable housing with on-site services for folks who are formerly homeless and who need housing that is going to support them to live their best, most stable lives. There are different types of supportive housing. Some supportive housing is like an entire building becomes a supportive housing project, right? So every unit in the building, it all becomes supportive housing. And then there are other types of supportive housing that are in community where it's just like one unit in a regular building, right? That the landlord has agreed to rent to a supportive housing provider. And then the provider places someone there after they've been screened, interviewed, approved for supportive housing. It's quite a long process to get approved. And so supportive housing agreements between New York State and New York City have been in effect for well over, I want to say, at least 15 years. And it is one of the most successful types of service for people who are homeless, who need the extra support. The reason we continue to renew the supportive housing funding in New York City and New York State is because most people who are placed into supportive housing are able to stabilize and become like very stable, successful community members. So supportive housing is a really great way to help people with various needs or vulnerabilities to basically move out of homelessness and rehouse. I'm happy to answer more questions about that. And I think, I'll just say also that supportive housing is available to many types of people beyond just people who are homeless. It's for people aging out of foster care, veterans with other needs, people who do have mental health diagnoses, some of them. And so it really helps a wide range of people. And the way that it stays affordable is the tenant pays 30% of their income towards rent. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that folks might have. I know that was maybe a lot of information.
Thank you so much for that context and again for being on the line. Does anyone have any questions for Amy?
Antoinette, it's not a question, but I just wanted to point out we have examples in our community already, including an entire building that Fifth Avenue Committee has on Fifth Avenue and 16th Street. And the last time the Housing Committee met, you voted in favor of a site, a single site in a building in Windsor Terrace. So we do have examples throughout the community already.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that there's successful.
There is an attendee with a hand up though, Antoinette.
Okay. Maria, I promoted you over to a panelist. Let me see if that worked.
Takes a second.
All right, Maria, I just unmuted your line.
Okay, I have a very quick question. Well, it's a comment in comment. I am a great believer and supporter of supported housing. Get started. I have worked with it. I have seen it be very effective in the lives of many, many people. The one thing I would say, my concern with it, and it's a programmatic concern, is that somebody first needs to become homeless in order to then be considered as a candidate for supportive housing. And let's keep that in mind, that supportive housing creation is just one of many approaches to dignified housing in New York or anywhere else. And I've always believed that prevention of homelessness is the most important, because particularly with young families, with young children, that it takes out the trauma of being homeless to begin with, to then be supported. So that's all I wanted to say. But it definitely is a great tool if a family has already entered the homeless community, that it must be a part, one of the many aspects of providing
Thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate that. Oh, I see there's another question. I'll wait.
Okay, Nick, you can unmute your line.
Sure. Amy, my question is more so in regards to maintenance and operation of the building, and how the budget works for this. So I understand that the Senate bill would facilitate acquisition, but in terms of overall funding and keeping the building up, where does the rest of that funding come from?
That's a really great question. The bill did cover for acquisition. In last year's budget, there was $100 million allocated for New York City conversions. We will be advocating this year for additional funding for more New York City and for the rest of New York State, because homelessness is a statewide problem. In terms of the money for operating, so there are a couple different ways that it can happen. If it's a supportive housing provider, the provider will secure their own funding. You know, they have a lot of experience working with banks to fund and underwrite, and they work with HPD and other government entities to make those complex funding streams happen. So that's for supportive housing. And then I think for affordable housing, similarly, a nonprofit developer will come and do a similar type of financing. And
Hold on though. So if the city basically or the state earmarked only $100 million, you're talking about probably acquiring less than maybe 10 properties with that kind of money, given just the nature of property values, regardless of how distressed they are. Is that about correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think so I want to put people at ease that this is a really great bill. It's a really sort of like once in a lifetime opportunity to use distressed properties to create permanent affordable housing for people who are homeless and or very low income. And because this bill passed, it will not cause a proliferation of new projects across your community. And right now it is only 100 million, and that will fund only a small number of projects. And so that's why we'll be advocating for more in this year's budget.
I gotcha. And then in terms of the bill, I'm sorry that I'm unfamiliar, but if it helps with the acquisition, typically there would be a note that follows the property that would be against the property. And so then the only concern then is that depending upon how leveraged that property is, that would then handcuff the operator from being able to borrow against future income to keep up the property. So that's really the basis of my question.
That is a little bit beyond my technical knowledge. My expertise is not in financing building acquisition at all. But certainly I think for affordable housing developers, one thing that we talk about a lot is, while there is a lot of financing and complex financing that happens for affordable housing, also there are vouchers that can be used as operating subsidy, which help pay their rent. And really it's going to be up to the developer to decide how they want to do that, if they want to do that. But one of the ideas that we are looking at is to have a really strong statewide voucher. It hasn't passed yet, so it doesn't exist, but vouchers are one really strong way to create ongoing operating subsidies for affordable housing. Otherwise, it gets financing through the cities, through some of their low income term sheets, where they are creating specifically low income housing. I can look into that for you, or I can put you in touch with someone who knows a lot more about the finance.
If you can,
end.
I mean, the main basis of it is, the creation of these is great. We all agree on that. However, the main concern is what happens 5 and 10 years from now when the sole funding source is derived from the state and these things are not self-supporting via any of the active programs. And so we don't want to create another NYCHA essentially where maintenance and everything else is not upheld. And then you hear all these really torrid stories, which are 100% true, because either mismanagement or no one's actually keeping up with the properties. So that's really where I'm going with this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will look into it, and if it's okay, I can pass on the information through Genesis, and I'd be happy to share that with you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for those questions, Nick. And Joan, I see you have your hand up.
Sorry,
No, you're fine.
will all of the bills be completely disable accessible? In other words, installing handles in bathrooms in the tub where people will be able to pull themselves up. This is kind of important because as people become older, not where they have to live in the facility for the aged, but as people are getting older, they become less mobile. And in order for them to be able to get out of a tub, they have to pull themselves up. So I'm not asking that everything has to be accessible. I should have made myself a little clearer, but just keep in mind that here on the supportive housing, you're saying that the homeless tenants with special needs is very, very diverse. So people have to come up with a plan. That's it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing up that important point. Yes, different types of supportive housing will cater to different groups. There are supportive housing providers that are, special, have niche areas or, special groups that they work with and have expertise in. So they will be sure to, I don't want to say retrofit, that's not the right word, but when they're, when they are updating the buildings, they will be sure to make the changes that are important for that community to, to thrive. And then I think also, I just learned this recently. I'm 95% sure that it's correct. But so for the acquisition of buildings, I think at a certain point, if the building was built before, I don't remember the year, unfortunately, before a certain year, then they can get grandfathered in where they don't have to be completely ADA accessible because the buildings they're grandfathered in. It's part of a pre-existing government agreement. However, if they're built after that, all of the buildings have to be redone so that they're ADA compliant. So that means things like widening doors so people in wheelchairs, they can get through, to make sure that everyone's needs are met. And so I can also find out more information about that. I am taking notes so that I can follow up with the right info for everyone.
Antoinette, not to butt in, but I can probably supplement that. Depending upon how much of the building is converted, there are certain triggers in the building code to require ADA compliance. And so if a lot of the older structures built prior to the ADA laws are not compliant, and if you're not converting more than 50% of the structure, there's not currently something that would enforce or mandate that those buildings become accessible. However, anything that would be 100% would be forced to comply with the current building codes and ADA laws, such as grab bars and showers, and then also some audio and visual items for fire alarm systems.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. So it sounds like there might be a need to have more advocacy work around ensuring that some of the supporting housing buildings that are being built under this legislation will in fact meet the needs of the community that they're serving. So we have two more folks with their hands up, Cindy and Barbara. And then if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to either use the chat or to raise your hand. But I'm not sure how much time Amy has left on the call with us. But if you do have any other questions, you can forward them over to us and we can touch base with Amy after the call. So Cindy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I know we're going to have the accessibility task force, but I wanted to underscore that I do know of situations in our borough where there are people who are wheelchair users who are in supportive housing because the building is accessible, but then there's not good like transportation options near to where they're living. And so then it's hard to get jobs and it's hard to get on your feet. And so I just wanted, I'm not going to like share specifics about that, but like, this is an urgent problem. Like you can't create supportive housing in a place where people actually like, sure, they can live there, but they can't really get a job and they can't use public transportation in a meaningful way. So that's also something I want to fold into this conversation that, you know, there is a real need for this, and specifically for like people, you know, people with who need sort of physical accessibility in their space. And if they're newer buildings, like I'm hoping that they're, you know, there would be designated apartments. It wouldn't be all retrofits, because when people need a place to live, they need a place to live soon, you know, and I don't like this idea of having people who use wheelchairs, putting them in a place just because the building's accessible, but they can't get a job, they can't get to work, they can't use public transportation. So we have to be more thoughtful about how we match up. And I'm hoping that, you know, the organizations that are involved in this are taking into account like how all those pieces fit together if it really is supportive housing. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'll just chime in quickly and say that, yes, I think that, you know, we advocated for the bill as part of a coalition, but the supportive housing providers are very like, they're experts at the work that they do. And I feel confident that the providers who are going to be looking at accessing this money for acquisition will only be looking for buildings that fit the needs of their community that they're planning to provide. So, you know, I think supportive housing providers can't control the transportation that exists, but I think they will keep in mind those other critical ancillary pieces, you know, because housing is fundamental, but also, you know, that's within an entire context of needs that we all have as people. So I'm sure that supportive housing providers will be looking at that type of environment as well.
Right. I know you can't control transportation, but the point is like, if there's an accessible subway station and there's going to be a development nearby, let's hope that there's wheelchair accessibility that's built into that plan, because the reality right now is that a wheelchair user who lives in the Bronx might end up getting put in an entirely different borough, not near accessible transportation, just because it's an accessible building. So there is an urgent need for this, and I'm hoping that that'll be taken into account.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And one other thing about the supportive housing process is that there's a really intense matching process that happens. So providers are very careful that when they're interviewing people, that the people have the match for the eligibility criteria of the type of supportive housing that their providers are running, and that the fit is good. So those types of things will definitely be taken into consideration in advance of a person being considered for a location. I appreciate the thoughtfulness. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. And then we have a question from Barbara.
Yes, hi, how you doing? I'm sorry I'm late. The question I asked is, how many buildings are being planned for our community? And do you have any locations picked out yet? You probably discussed this already, I apologize.
Yeah, so Barbara, Amy was really just speaking in general about about the legislation just passed over this earlier this year. there aren't any current plans, from my understanding, that are set forth for this community. What it looks like is that Eric Adams had a press conference in front of a vacant hotel in Sunset Park, just advocating and showing support for this legislation and looking to implement it in New York City. But from my understanding, there aren't any concrete plans to build supportive housing under that legislation here in Sunset Park just yet.
All right, then, thank you.
All right, anyone else have any questions for Amy? All right, if you have any other questions, feel free to send them over, and we can reach out to Amy if that's okay, to get some input. But thank you so much for taking the time to be on the call. Really appreciate it. There was a lot of back and forth at our last meeting, so really appreciate you being on to help clear.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for your time and for your attention and honest thoughtfulness and important questions about this. I know it's a hot topic, and so I appreciate that this community is really thinking about what's going to work well for everyone. I'm happy, yeah, and I will be in touch, and any questions they'll get sent to me and I'll be sure to respond, and I will look to get the information that we previously discussed that I didn't know to you soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so just a quick time check. It's 6:35 now, and for the second half of the meeting, what I'd like to do is just set some goals and expectations for the Housing Committee, and sort of planning how we'd like to move forward. At our last meeting, there were these 4 fundamental working groups that came out of that meeting and how to move forward. The first was community outreach, and some aspect of that was reaching out to folks in the community, letting them know about the Sunset Park library project, especially the application that'll soon be live. And I also believe that there was some talk about doing some work with tenants and advocacy work. John Santori had mentioned creating a research team that would focus on housing economics. And then there was an idea of having a group that would really hone in on issues that homeowners are facing. I know that there were discussions at our last meeting about having someone come in and speak about, I think it might have been from National Grid, about, and I'm sorry if I'm misremembering that, but there were discussions about having someone come in for a presentation about matters that would affect homeowners. And then Cindy had mentioned forming a group that would focus on housing accessibility issues. So I just, these ideas are out here. I want to be really transparent with how we move forward as a group, and what we have capacity for and what we should, focus in on. So want to have an open and honest conversation about what your expectations are, and how we should move forward. So if anybody has any input, let's see, Barbara, you can unmute your line.
Hi, so at the last general meeting, there was talk about maybe housing taking on the role that's going to be abandoned by, I guess, the now defunct ad hoc homelessness issues committee.
Right, so that was mentioned, and we can talk about that as a group. I'm not 100% clear on why that committee was dissolved.
Right.
I'm a part of that committee, and I just found out that it was no longer a committee at the last board meeting.
Right.
But I mean, you know, I just want to have a real honest conversation with everyone. We had at our previous meeting proposed these working groups if people feel that they are able to take that on in addition to other things, then you know, I'm more than happy to fit it in. But you know, just being very, you know, transparent, that was all of the work of a whole committee, you know, that was already formed. So that might be a lot. And and I know that there was a lot of work that went into that committee with creating surveys and building relationships with the shelters. And I'm not sure where that left off, but you know, just want to really like set expectations. You know, I know a lot of times we'll be on a committee and we won't find out about like what's going on until the day of. I want this to be really inclusive. I want people to feel like they have like input and like we're all working together and, you know.
Right. I just felt it was also important because we talked about homeowners, and there's a lot of people in the area that are very concerned about what's going on, especially in respect to the fact that they're homeowners and they've been having problems or they want to develop, you know, a healthy relationship. So
Right.
I really hate to have that, you know, dissipate. At this time right now, a few weeks ago, people in the community have gotten together on their own to start having meetings on their own. And I really feel like this is, you know, this is not something they should take it upon themselves. So we need to work with the community board as well.
Okay. And Karen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, as chair of the homelessness committee, I was having I was struggling engaging people to come to solutions and make solutions and things like that. And it was becoming an awful lot of work. And so I had to resign as chair because I just couldn't handle all the work that was involved. There's definitely a need for it. You know, and as chair of the homelessness committee, you're also constantly fielding complaints from constituents, which, you know, I totally understand how constituents feel about some of the behavior, about some of the people, but it's just a lot to have to deal with. And I just wasn't able to put in those types of hours. So that's why, and then once I resigned, there was really no one left to take the lead. So I'm hoping, Antoinette, that, you know, we can roll it into the housing committee because there are just more people to help out.
Yeah. Do you know if an email was circulated finding out if anyone had capacity to take on?
I sent out 4 emails just asking people to get together to meet, and I got no responses. So that was where I left it. If I can't even get people to respond to whether they want to meet, you know, and I left it up to the chair to see. The chair of the community board assigns the chairmanships. So, you know, he was made aware of what was going on.
Okay. Yeah, well, you know, and I'm happy to see how everyone else feels. Me personally, I think folding 2 committees into one might be a lot, especially when there was a whole other committee that was dedicated to this issue. And maybe this is a conversation to have with Caesar, that maybe he could bring it up during a community board meeting, just talking about the fact that there wasn't capacity. Maybe it's something that could be revived. You know, I feel that there might be a capacity issue, but again, if you know, happy to hear how other folks might feel. Cindy, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, it's on a different topic, but I just, you know, I sent a few emails this year, like wanting to do a joint a series of joint meetings to look at accessible, affordable housing. To make our board more informed, as well as people in the community, first of all, of like what the options are that exist. And I would like to see that be a joint effort. Like, I'd like for us, if we host a meeting, to explore and learn about the various different accessible, affordable housing options that exist for residents, that it could be like a joint committee meeting, because to kind of Karen's point, and I think it's a broader issue across the board, is that, I find when we do joint meetings that it brings more people into the conversation, and especially issues that sort of intersect across committees. So as far as like the task force, I mean, I don't know whether it needs to be called a task force, or whether it could just be like we mutually dedicate ourselves to co-hosting like a series of meetings, first to inform, and secondly to identify opportunities for improvements, like, making sure that government sponsored databases are actually have the accessibility information included. Like, a lot of times that doesn't happen, because there are contractors that are being used, that sort of thing. So, and the other thing I wanted to say is that, at least from the Ability and Access Committee standpoint, like, we are trying to do our own outreach to people within the community who have disabilities, are affected by disabilities, or work with disability service organizations, because we really would like to hear from people who live in the community about their needs and what they'd like to see. So I just wanted to share, it's a bigger topic. I don't want to take too much time, but I would like to do some joint meetings around this topic so that we as a board can be more informed. And especially when like land use and that sort of thing comes before the board, I think it would be helpful to have more board members understand exactly like what currently exists for people with disabilities, and where are there gaps and needs that really need to be addressed, like the one that we spoke of, that both Joan and I brought up in the last, like when the speaker was here. So that's all I have from that perspective. But we are having an Ability and Access meeting on the 15th, and we will certainly like make this an agenda item, but we'd like to follow up early next year, maybe doing more informational sessions and kind of build on that.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
And may I say one other thing, which is Joan is on Ability and Access and Housing. We don't have any other overlap. So again, like, it may be helpful, like if the Housing Committee is reviewing something within committee, but only Joan has attended the meeting about accessible, affordable housing, it's kind of problematic, right? So that's why I'm saying it would be helpful if we did something that's jointly hosted, if that's possible.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. All right, does anybody else have any other ideas about the working group, the housing working groups, or if there should be other proposed working groups? I just don't want this to be formatted in a way that's very top down. I want us all to be working together. So if there are some folks who are interested in working with Cindy on putting together a meeting early next year on housing accessibility, looking up presenters, and working on that, we can work and we could form a working group around that issue. If there is a group of people that really want to hone in on community outreach and thinking of creative ways that we can get the word out to folks in the community about the Sunset Park Library project and the application, and providing support in that way. I was thinking, other folks could dive into that. I don't want folks to feel overwhelmed. I think there are a lot of us on this committee, and I think that there's a lot of work that we could do. But I also want to feel people out because I also don't want to overcommit to too many things. So I'm really interested in hearing what your expectations are for this working group. I mean, for the housing committee.
This is Maria Roca. I think the United States is somewhat behind what particularly Western Europe does with accessibility in housing, any type of housing from a design point. And I think if we could, as a committee, as a board, be more up to date on what can be good for everyone, not just for folks who need particular access or have whatever different abilities they have, that this is good design so that when any property is purchased, any multiple use for multiple users is used, becomes like a basic.
Maria, did we lose you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had unmuted myself. I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Having worked in renovation and construction related issues of creating affordable housing, whether it was real affordable housing, whether it was ownership or rental. One of the challenges has always been putting in those changes or making those upgrades in a building as that building is being renovated for a new population of people, regardless of their age. And so let's keep in mind that, for example, the United States is kind of far, it's behind that thinking. If we look to Western Europe, what are the codes, the building codes and requirements that when you do any upgrades or you, like we're trying to do is to retrofit buildings or build buildings from the get-go that will serve people through the life continuum. Just basic things that everyone can benefit from, not just wait for somebody to be in a wheelchair, to have drawers and shelves that come out to you, because we're all gonna get older. We get older the moment we're born.
Okay, so I just sent out a message in the chat. So if you're a part of the housing committee, if you could respond via the chat really quickly. This is not something that's, that you're married to. We can move things around moving forward, but just to get a general sense of where folks are at, if you could just respond in the chat saying which working group you'd be interested in. So there's community outreach, housing economics, homeowners, and housing accessibility. And for the housing accessibility piece, that would be working with Cindy and her group on programming and making sure that the board is updated with information on accessibility issues in the community.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nick, Grisel, John, appreciate it. Okay, so take a moment to think about it. Send your chat. I can also send out an email with a poll just to reconcile all of this information. And then to overwhelm you with things to do, I'm also going to drop here a link to a doodle poll for our next meeting in December. I just put some dates together on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I think maybe a Monday date. And that's just because I'm taking a class on Wednesday. So unfortunately, that's not the best day that works for me. But I put some options there. Let's try to figure out a day that works best for people. That way we can keep the momentum going and meet at least one more time before the end of the year. And then really want to take some time now just to talk about, what that next meeting should look like for December. Does anybody have any ideas? Is it, do we want to have another, let me just go back to the working groups. Do we want to have another meeting with the community going over the Sunset Park library application? We don't have a date for when that'll be available, but I'm not sure. Those meetings happened mostly over the summer that FAC had hosted. So I'm not sure, if maybe there could be a push just to get people acquainted with that. Any other ideas that folks might have? Are there any issues surrounding homeowners that might be of interest for next month's meeting?
One item would be local law 152 for the homeowners. Get your gas inspection or the city's going to ask you for about 10 grand.
Okay.
I also have one answer that kind of overlaps. The illegal basements that has happened with the flooding. So giving education, not necessarily in a punitive manner, but really informing people about that and the dangers of having that and how to make that safer. I mean, it's still going to happen, but I don't want it to be punitive about it. But just discussing the legality. So, during the last hurricane, a lot of the basements flooded, not necessarily around here, but that just brought up the whole fact that a lot of the basements that people were living in were illegal.
Right.
Yeah, there's also legislation right now in the state to regulate that type of housing.
So like informing people so they have informing information, things like that. The homeowners,
Antoinette, it's Ravika. Can we do something on fire safety also? There was another fire in the neighborhood a couple of days ago, 23rd
I
Street.
was just about to mention that. Yes. Thank you.
It just seems like we've had quite a few fires and a couple very recently that's displaced a lot of families. And so I'm not sure what's going on, but I feel like a discussion and information session on fire safety, I think would be really helpful.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think we were going to say the same thing, but you could go ahead, Maria.
Okay, thank you. For those who might not know, 34 individuals are homeless tonight because of the fire 2 days ago at the corner of 43rd Street and 5th Avenue. So far, the information that has been put out by the fire department is that there was an ill-installed water tank in the deli/bodega on the first floor that exploded, and then just the fire moved upstairs through the wall. And when the fire department fortunately responded in an extremely quick time, because one of the tenants had one of those alarms that you put around your neck, and she just pressed it, and that, called out the fire department immediately. And so she's in the hospital with some, but not in, her life is not in danger. 2 fire fighters were affected, but again, non-life threatening. But in a matter of a New York minute, 34 people were rendered homeless. And so that goes back to fire code, that goes back to inspections, there's many other issues, but that we need more information going to tenants as to how to find out about their landlord's responsibility. What have they done? Have things, and what are the responsibilities and what are their rights as tenants once they are rendered homeless? And right now, those folks were given support by bringing an MTA bus to the corner of 43rd and 5th for a couple of days, but it's, and District 38, Menchaca has opened his office to donations of clothing, and there is information online about that. But really, going forward, what is available to those tenants is not exactly clear. And I think we need to discuss whether we can solve the problem or not. We need to talk more about that so people are prepared, because your life, your status quo can change in a quick moment. And what can we do with small businesses, truly small businesses that need to make upgrades and need to make changes that are affordable to them? So there's an overlap there between housing and small businesses, because in Sunset Park, there's a lot of the truly affordable housing is above small businesses. Thank you.
Antoinette, if I may.
Yep.
So what Maria has just described is essentially a tenant who did something illegal, which then has both materially affected every tenant in the building as well as the landlord. And so there's a lot of that happens all over the place in New York City because people do not wish to file and don't want to go through headaches involving the Department of Buildings. And the only way that you can truly solve that is, for one, people to follow the rules. And then number two, there is no mandate to fully sprinkler every building in New York City, not even today. And if you wanted to do that, you can, but it would be hugely expensive. The new sprinkler system could easily cost $50,000 to $60,000, and then would also displace the tenants temporarily while it was installed because it would be an active construction site. So those solutions are not as easy to implement and have other wide-ranging impacts as well.
That's tough. Thank you for that,
I'm
Nick.
wondering if we can have a joint meeting maybe with Department of Buildings and maybe a tenants' rights organization combined to talk about code enforcement. I don't know if HPD might be another city agency that can join to talk about code enforcement and tenants' rights on the same day. And maybe a separate workshop or meeting for small businesses on code enforcement and, I don't know, resources available to bring their business up to date with what Maria was mentioning.
Right.
Not sure yet which city agency besides SBS, which is not always the most useful.
If I may just add one thing, which is, as long as that discussion did not talk about the basement apartments, because that then will overlap around affordable housing, and you essentially would be removing housing from what's available. And I think that discussion we've had a couple of times. I think probably even going all the way back to like some industry city discussions, Antoinette, but everything else, yeah, even though I can probably tell you what they're going to say.
Yeah, Nick, so I was referring to fires. fires and HPD or Department of Buildings and a Tenants' Rights Association to talk about tenants' rights and when it comes to fires. When it comes to basement, I think that's a whole different conversation that we should have and maybe talk about solutions and legislation like the other person was mentioning, I forgot the name.
It was Cindy who brought that up and just about the basement conversions and maybe talking about the legislation that has passed about that.
Nothing has passed, but there's legislation. Yeah.
There's legislation working. Okay, thank you for that analysis. So Joan, I see your hand is up. Just give me one quick second. So thank you everyone for all of this input and for mentioning which working groups you're interested in. So I'm just going to spit back to you what I've heard. So over the next couple of months, what we'll do is work to form housing committee meetings around the following topics. One will be on fire safety, tenants' rights, and code enforcement. I'm not sure if there's another committee that focuses on small businesses in Sunset Park, but we can look into that and maybe doing
That would be
something.
economic development.
Oh, okay. All right. So thank you, Jeremy. So maybe we could do something jointly with them. It was also mentioned talking about the basement conversions, and thank you, Hannah, says that bill hasn't passed, but maybe talking about what's proposed right now. Nick had mentioned doing a workshop focused on local law 152. I'm thinking maybe we can have that as early as December and give us some more time to flush out the other items. And then we also have here the joint accessibility and housing meeting. So I know, Cindy, you're having a meeting coming up. Will you be discussing this topic at all at that meeting, or should we plan to have something later in the coming months? I'm not sure if Cindy's still on. All right, I think Cindy jumped off, but I know Cindy has a access and ability meeting coming up. I think it's on the 15th. I'm not sure if this topic is on the agenda at all, but for folks who are interested in that committee, we could work with Cindy to talk about, hashing out what the agenda should look like for that joint meeting. Any other ideas that folks might have? So far, we're good. Okay. And Maria, you had mentioned that Menchaca's office had sent out a link for support for the families that were affected by the fire. Would you mind sharing that so that I can distribute it out to folks in the committee in case, they're interested in supporting in any way?
Sure. It was all over social media, the different platforms, and it's basically a breakdown of how many children by age, how many adults, and size, and how many adults, male and female, for clothing. It's basic. Now, I understand also that the Fifth Avenue bid is putting together a GoFundMe. But I haven't seen it yet. And today, through Friends of Sunset Park, I received a notice that Dewey Middle School, one of the teachers at Dewey Middle School has put up a GoFundMe because one of the families that lived in that building attends school there. So whatever links I have, I will put up. I'm not sure how soon because I'm literally out on Fifth Avenue waiting for a bus to get home. So yeah, I'll put it up. And if not, Antoinette, I'll send it to you. And I have an idea who else is on this call. And I will also send it out to everybody. So we'll get it out, but one way or the other, by tomorrow, It would be
Maria,
awesome.
please
Whoever-
send it to the community board. We
Sure.
have a
Oh,
pretty
you
good
didn't
reach.
receive it? I guess. Oh, I assume you had received it from Menchaca's office, but I'll send everything to you as well so you can
Thank you.
help spread the word. Sure, of course. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. So we have, sorry, so we have a couple of hands up still, and I'm sorry that we went over time, but really appreciate just trying to hash out what the next couple of months will look like. Joan, you had your hand up before. Did you still want to make a comment?
No, just a little piece of information I want to share. Every building that has a fire sprinkler system has to have a test every 5 years. It's called the flow test, and it's a test to test the power of the sprinkler water coming out in order to put out the fires. And the fire department keeps track. And after the 5 years, if you don't have it done, you get a fine and a summons. So every 5 years, you have to have it tested. And if you don't, you're really in trouble. And I'm sure a lot of people do not do it. And that's very unfortunate.
Thank you for that piece of information. And then I also saw, Tin, you had your hand up raised for a while. I'm sorry. I'm going to promote you to panelist. Let me see. You should be able to unmute your line. Let me see.
Hi there, this is Ting from Councilmember Menchaca's office. I just want to give a few updates adding on to what Maria said. So yes, our office, we are coordinating donations with South Brooklyn Mutual Aid. I can share information in the chat. We will be opening tomorrow, Sunday and Monday and Tuesday for donations. And there is a donation page for GoFundMe. It was just created like 2 hours ago. So I can also share that in the chat. That is organized by the bid. And we're also working with the families to secure housing or see how we can get them housing because they only have 2 days at the shelter. So we're trying to work with Red Cross to see if we can figure something out. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Grisel, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. Just to inform you that United Senior Center has a lot of things to donate. So we're gonna give all that donation to the Carlos Menchaca's office. And what we have is thing special for seniors. So seniors and people with disability, we have a lot of things. So we're gonna send everything to Carlos Menchaca's office, maybe tomorrow or Monday. I gonna get on information at what time they're gonna be open the office, and we're gonna send on a van with Azteca Car Service. Azteca Car Service will donate the transportation for us to take the things to Carlos Menchaca's office.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really great.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'll be following up with folks on a number of items that we talked about and planning out the next couple of months. Thank you all for attending. We only went over 12 minutes. I think that's a record. Does anybody else have any final comments they want to make before we end tonight's meeting? Oh, and thanks, Ting, for sending over the link. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll also send it to Jeremy, the posters for clothing donations and as well as the link.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, since it is November and we won't be meeting till December, trust that everyone has a peaceful and quiet holiday, Thanksgiving weekend.
Thank you, Maria.
Here, here, I agree.
Okay, everyone. So I'll consolidate everything that we talked about today and send a recap. I'll also be following up with folks who mentioned which working group they'd like to be a part of. And yeah, I'm really excited to get to work. All right. Have a good evening, everyone, and talk soon.
Ciao,
Thank you.
Bella.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.